Welcome, everybody. I think we'll get started. So I'd just like to welcome everybody officially to this event entitled Rivers of Peace, the Rights of Nature, Biodiversity, Conservation and Peacebuilding in Chocó, Colombia. It's absolutely fabulous to see people here face to face. I don't think we believed it until we saw you coming into the room that we would actually be here face to face. So very welcome. My name is Mo Hume, and I'm a professor of Latin American politics here at the University of Glasgow. And together with my colleague Alan Gillis, who's over there, who's really done all the work in terms of putting today together, but also our partners at the Universities of Nottingham and Portsmouth, and our partners who were really delighted to be here tonight, AB Colombia, SCIAF, there's a good contingent from SCIAF here, the Diocese of Quibdó, Siembra, and our other speakers here on the panel. But together as this group, we've been developing research on the intersections of socio-environmental conflict and sustainable peace in Chocó. As many of you know, Chocó has been recognized as an important top 10 biodiversity hotspot for the world. So speaking about the socio-environmental conflicts, but also the forms of resistance in Chocó is absolutely crucial to the wider discussions around the climate crisis that we're having in Glasgow this week and next week. The region is the most ethnically diverse and the poorest region of Colombia and has been one of the most affected by the conflict and also by the processes of extractivism that often intersect with armed conflict in both implicit and explicit ways. As a result, communities in the region have been living through protracted and overlapping humanitarian crises, but crucially have been forging creative and persistent strategies to resist the very deep socio-environmental devastation that they're facing. Key to this resistance is the amplification of local voices and knowledges, including the voice of the Atrato River, the key artery in the region, which was recognized as a bearer of rights in a landmark court ruling T622 by the Colombian Constitutional Court. We're absolutely delighted to have such a fantastic range of speakers here this evening, all of whom have direct experience in working through ways of interweaving necessary local and global agendas to restore natural habitat and biodiversity and to protect biodiversity alongside peace-building efforts and pioneering socio-environmental justice. So I want to just introduce our speakers in the order that they will speak. And I will, the main language tonight will be in English. I will translate for Alejandro and for Marjorie. I'm not a professional translator, so please do feel free to butt in if I become a bit stumbling. So just to introduce the speakers, firstly, we have Knut Andres Orgland Lid, who is Acting Secretary General of Caritas Norway and a Programme Director in Caritas Norway. Knut has very many years' experience working with the Norwegian Centre for Human Rights. He has master's and undergraduate degrees in political science from the University of Oslo, and he has published widely on the theme of transitional justice, specifically a focus on land restitution in Colombia. Next to Knut, we have Alejandro Perez. Alejandro is a sociologist from the Universidad Santo Tomás, and he has a master's degree in human development from Flaxo, Argentina. Alejandro has more than 10 years of experience working for peace in different parts of Colombia. He's worked with the National Social Ministry Team, SNPS, and is a researcher with the Kroc Institute to monitor the implementation of the peace accords. He also has research experience in the extractive sector and its impact on communities. He served as coordinator of the Ibagué territorial team of the Unit for the Search for Missing Persons, which covers Tolima and northern Huila. He currently works as an SNPS senior specialist in political advocacy and peace issues, where he's been accompanying different communities affected by violence and on issues related to care for our common home. Next to Alejandro, we have Viviana González, a lawyer specializing in environmental law from the Universidad del Rosario in Bogotá. Viviana has more than six years' experience working with ethnic authorities in the Department of Chocó, Colombia. She is the Deputy Director of Litigation at the Centro Sociojurídico, Siembra, where she represents the plaintiffs of the Atrato River injunction in the implementation of Court Ruling T622, which recognised the Atrato River as a rights holder. Finally, we have Mayuri Mosquera Palacios, born in Jurado, Chocó. Mayuri is an economist, graduated from the University of the Pacific in Buenaventura. She represents the Afro-descendant Community Council of Cocomopoca as a guardian of the Atrato River in the framework of the T622 court ruling that recognises the Atrato River as a rights holder. She is part of the technical team of the Interethnic Forum Solidarity Chocó, FISH, where she is part of the technical secretariat of the collegiate body of community guardians of the River Atrato. In October 2021, the collegiate body of the community guardians of the Atrato River was awarded the El Colombiano Ejemplar Prize in the environmental category. The prize recognises individuals and institutions who contribute towards making Colombia a better country. So huge congratulations to the guardians on the award of this prize, and you're all very welcome. Bienvenidos, bienvenidas a Glasgow. And without further ado, I will pass the mic to Newt.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak here today. I'm standing in for Martha Skretteberg, the Secretary General of Caritas Norway, who unfortunately could not be here today with us. She is also Colombian, so she has a special interest as well. And for me, myself, I have also a close connection with Colombia. I'm married with my wife is Colombian, and my daughter is Norwegian Colombian, so I have a vested interest in the future of Colombia. So it's working some for Caritas, but also for myself, working on Colombia. As you mentioned, my background is from academia, some human rights and transitional justice in particular. I was also focused on Colombia and in the process of the demobilization of the Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia, the AUC, quite a few years back. And then after that, moving into development and Caritas, where I've been the last 9 years. I've been asked to speak today a bit more broadly on the concept of conflict and climate and peace building, and that is a big topic and quite multifaceted. And in reflecting on how to approach this theme, I kept turning back to the concept of refugees and internally displaced people. Because traditionally, the refugees are people fleeing from conflicts towards security and freedom. But the concept is really changing. Nowadays, we see kind of the climate refugees as a new concept, which is far outnumbering the refugees resulting from conflict. There are 3 times as many climate refugees as refugees from conflict. And we also see the climate refugees in Colombia as well. I think depending on how you define the term, but on the one hand, you see people being displaced from their homes when mitigating climate change through conservation activities, conservation of the land, as we see in many parts of rural Colombia. And on the other hand, we also see a second group of refugees that are passing through Colombia. A few years ago, I went to close to the Panama border in Capurganá. And going through the city, it's kind of a mix between a place of tourism, but you also saw large groups of people that really didn't belong in Colombia. So from Bangladesh or from Haiti and other places of the world, being trafficked through the same places that people lived in the middle of the center. So it's quite open. And those are people that are normally called kind of economic migrants. But that is also where the climate comes in, as the climate leads to a degradation of the livelihoods where they live, and they are forced to flee, so becoming also climate refugees. There is kind of an injustice that is underlying the climate refugees, because in the conflicts you can identify the aggressor, you can identify the threat. We can hold the people, the aggressors responsible, we can hold the governments responsible. But in terms of the climate refugees, you really don't have no one to hold responsible. You can hold the emitters, the great emitters, responsible for it, but the refugees are really without any rights. So he's looking at the population in the case of Chocó. Many are victims of aggressors that are identified. They have certain rights according to the Colombian law. in terms of enjoying those rights, that's quite limited, of course, but at least they do have some rights, they do have a framework. For many of the climate refugees, you don't have that framework, and that's really an injustice that we need to change. They have to have the right to remedy as well. In Caritas, we work always along the so-called triple nexus, which is kind of development speech for the aspiration to work on development, humanitarian, and peace building in combination. And we have programs in many continents. We work in the Sahel region, in sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, and in Asia. And across the continents, all contexts, we observe the changes in the climate that creates conditions that contributes to increased tensions within groups and also between groups. And while there is diversity in views of what is the causal mechanisms of conflict and climate, we can at least say that climate is a stressor of conflict, intensified conflict, even though we can't always say that it is the cause of the conflict. But we know that climate change creates scarcity, scarcity of water, fertile soils, scarcity of land. And scarcity and the threat of scarcity, which is also important, contribute to conflicts between states as a result of control of water sources. Nowadays, we're also looking into, hearing a lot about the dam project in Ethiopia, how that creates tensions also with Egypt, that it's reliant on the same water that Ethiopia now is increasingly controlling. What we have been seeing in our program is the conflict between the farmers and the pastoralists that are fighting more or less over the same land. They need the land for their animals to graze, and that is the same land that the farmers are using to farm. So they enter into conflict. And as we expect also that the conflicts will grow in number and intensity as scarcity is is being increased, and the competition over the fewer and fewer resources as a result. But we also see the rise in conflicts related to mitigation of climate change, which is kind of a different aspect of it, both in terms of conservation of land and also in development of renewable energy sources. And that is also some of the topic here today, which makes it very interesting. We see large-scale damming projects displace vulnerable populations all over the world, from China to Colombia. And also in Norway, which are, all of our energy comes from hydropower, more or less. And I think the first kind of cases of civil disobedience in Norway was also a result of a hydropower project that was being developed. And looking into solar energy as well, that is not an exception. We also see a lot of conflicts created as a result of establishing the solar plants. Several years ago, we in Caritas Norway were involved in one of those projects, where a Norwegian actor called Scatec Solar was developing a project in Honduras. Without really the consent of the local population. So they bought a project from a different actor, so kind of that was a bit of a messy process that they enter into. And they created a conflict with the local community, and death threats, and I think some people were killed as well in that conflict later on, which is something that is a good intention and goes towards mitigating climate change, but the consequences are quite dramatic. And later on, it was also discovered that one of the partners of this Norwegian company has been was a Honduran company, which was later convicted of, or the head of that company was later convicted of the murder of a human rights and environmental defender called Berta Cáceres in Honduras, which is perhaps the most famous environmental defender in Honduras. And that was not the intention of the Norwegian company to go into those areas and to work with those kind of actors, but they didn't have enough information on it, and it did not have a strong enough human rights perspective on their interventions. And we see it also in Colombia. We have the damming projects in Colombia, which are fraught with many challenges, be it the Hidroituanga and the Urra dams that are being developed, and everything that has ensued in the aftermath. We see it in the protection of the tropical forest as well, in terms of assassinations of environmental and human rights defenders. We in Caritas have a project also in Caquetá, in southern Colombia, and we see also how the pressures on the human rights defenders there, it's increasing. And we also observe that the degradation of ecosystems also drive conflicts, as mentioned. I think that is one of the predicaments we have as well, because moving towards the green shift that we all need and we want, we also rely on raw materials, on minerals, and these minerals are often located in areas with very vulnerable populations. We have a different project in the DRC, which is close to the coltan mines. We all depend on in terms of batteries, our cell phones, and everything. And the conditions in those areas, it's quite precarious. And you see how conflict also ensues from the exploitation of those minerals. So that is also the risk. You have the victims of climate, so to say, in terms of the climatic changes, but also in how we try to mitigate the climatic changes. So it goes from both ends. And in that race to save the planet, we also risk placing both the cost and the violation of the rights of those most vulnerable. But again, the link between the climate and conflict is multifaceted, and it's also important for us as development actors to recognize this and to design the programs to take this into account. And that is also why it's for the Caritas organization, it's always a top priority to integrate the human rights perspective strongly into all our actions we do in development, humanitarian, and peace building. And I think looking at how the climate is changing, how the pressure on the resources is being increased, this is some components we need to strengthen every year in the time to come. So I think that is, I'm going to leave it there. But I'll try to say at least that there are many ways to connect climate and conflict, and those conflicts are increasing. We need to take into account in the future as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Newt. So lots to kind of frame some of our discussions and to think about. Alejandro, ¿en inglés o en castellano?
Español. Bueno, muchas gracias a la Universidad de Glasgow, a Mo y al equipo de AB Colombia y SCIAF que me invitaron a este espacio.
So thanks to the University of Glasgow, to the whole team, to AB Colombia and SCIAF for inviting him to take part in this space here tonight.
Agradezco también a Knut que hizo una muy buena introducción sobre la relación entre conflicto y como medio ambiente.
Newt has offered us a very good introduction to conflict and environment.
Yo quisiera hacer ya como un estudio de caso mucho más concreto del país, de Colombia, de lo que ha pasado en el país después de la firma de los acuerdos de paz.
He would like to develop a more concrete or more specific case study, which is that of Colombia, and specifically Colombia following the signature of the peace accords.
Como no sé si ustedes saben, este año se cumplen 5 años de la firma de los acuerdos de paz en Colombia.
So I'm not sure if you're aware, but this year has marked 5 years since the signing of the peace accords in Colombia.
Y creo que es el momento de ver y evaluar como algunas de los avances que hemos tenido en este acuerdo.
And that means it's the moment to kind of think about and evaluate some of the advances we've had in terms of the peace agreement.
Hay dos preocupaciones principales que tenemos como Caritas Colombiana frente a este tema relacionado con la COP y construcción de paz.
So there are two key worries that we have as Caritas Colombia that have to do with both the theme of the COP, but also the construction of peace.
Desde la firma de los acuerdos de paz en Colombia, la deforestación ha aumentado de manera exponencial.
Since the signing of the peace accords, deforestation has risen exponentially in Colombia.
El segundo punto que también está aumentando muchísimo es el asesinato de los líderes ambientales en Colombia.
And the second point that he wants to talk about is that the fact that the murder of environmental defenders has also risen significantly.
Creo que hemos escuchado que del 2018 al 2020 han aumentado en 150% las muertes de líderes ambientales en Colombia.
So between 2018 and 2020, the murder of environmental leaders in Colombia rose by 150%.
Y el año pasado fuimos el país más peligroso para los defensores ambientales en Colombia, como lo dice el informe de Global Witness.
And last year, the Global Witness report said that Colombia was the most dangerous country to be an environmental defender.
Pero la pregunta es como, ¿qué ha pasado para que estemos en esta situación?
So the question we have to ask ourselves is what has happened so that we're facing this situation?
Desde la firma de los acuerdos con las FARC en Colombia, con la salida de las FARC de los territorios que ellos ocupaban, dejaron un vacío de poder.
So with the signing of the peace agreement with the FARC, that meant that the FARC left the territories, and that opened up a kind of a vacuum of power.
Muchas organizaciones de la sociedad civil siempre pedimos al gobierno poder llenar estos espacios o estos vacíos de poder.
And many civil society organizations lobbied the governments to be able to fill these spaces, these vacuums of power.
Pero realmente no ha sido llenado por el Estado colombiano, lo que ha hecho que se generen nuevos grupos armados en estos territorios.
And the Colombian state has not filled these vacuums. Instead, these have been filled by new armed actors.
Estos grupos están muy relacionados con la extracción de recursos naturales, como mencionaba tal vez un poco Kino.
And these groups are related to groups who are linked to extractive practices.
Tenemos minería ilegal, tenemos petróleo, tenemos madera, tenemos coca y otros productos.
There are multiple commodities here. There's illegal mining, there's petrol or oil, there's wood or illicit logging, and obviously coca.
Esta mayor explotación de recursos naturales ha hecho que también los grupos armados que están allí empiecen a pelear por el territorio.
And this greater or intensified exploitation of natural resources has meant that these armed actors also have intensified their conflict with each other.
En la actualidad en Colombia tenemos una situación humanitaria muy difícil en diferentes zonas del país, con cifras muy altas nuevamente de desplazamiento forzado, asesinato, confinamiento, masacres y otros.
So we have a very difficult humanitarian context for many communities throughout Colombia, with increases in disappearances, confinement of communities, massacres and murders.
Hay un vínculo directo entre la inestabilidad o la situación humanitaria y la degradación ambiental en Colombia.
In Colombia, there's a direct link between the environmental degradation and humanitarian crisis or instability.
Y es un círculo vicioso entre mayor conflicto, mayor degradación, mayor vulnerabilidad y se repite.
And there's a kind of a vicious circle between more environmental degradation, more conflict, more crisis.
A mayor degradación también están cambiando, hay clima cambiante, las lluvias, las temperaturas, lo que hace más vulnerable a las comunidades.
And with environmental degradation, we also see changes in the climate, more rain, more suffering for communities.
La respuesta del Estado principalmente ha sido de tipo militar.
And the state's main response has been a military one.
Ellos, su respuesta principal ha sido algo que han llamado la campaña Artemisa, que es una campaña militar para frenar la deforestación en estas zonas.
And so the main response has been a military campaign called Campaña Temisa,
Sí.
which has basically been increasing the military presence in these areas.
Esta campaña Artemisa, con su enfoque militar, ha generado mucho más conflictividad y violación de derechos humanos con los campesinos que están en estas zonas.
So this Campaña Temisa, with its militarized logic, has led to more human rights abuses in communities.
Por eso, como Cáritas Colombia, creemos que necesitamos, primero que todo, trabajar para la protección de la vida de los líderes ambientales.
And so as Caritas Colombia, we think it's absolutely necessary to work towards the protection of the lives of environmental leaders.
Y para esto también el acuerdo tiene muchas medidas para la protección de líderes que no han sido implementadas.
And it's worth mentioning here that the peace accord has many clauses that deal directly with the protection of leaders, and these have not been implemented.
También el tema de deforestación en Colombia no puede ser solamente desde un enfoque militar, sino que tiene que tener una visión más amplia relacionada con el tema de paz.
And also the response to deforestation in Colombia can't just be a military response, but we need a much broader and peace-focused, if you like, response.
Esto es muy importante porque creo que en un país como Colombia no podemos dividir lo que es cambio climático, situación ambiental, a construcción de paz y derechos humanos.
And this is really important because in a country like Colombia, we can't kind of separate out climate change, environmental destruction, human rights, and the peace process.
Creo que el gobierno nacional ha enfocado mucho más en su tema frente a su visión que da o su imagen al mundo en temas ambientales, que lo hemos visto en esta COP, y en temas de migración.
And this is important because the national government of Colombia has kind of sold an image of itself as, and we see this very clearly in COP26 as a kind of environmentalist government, or a government that acts in protection of the environment.
Pero la situación de derechos humanos en Colombia es necesario que todos los temas estén interrelacionados.
But given the situation of human rights in Colombia, it's really important that all of these different kind of themes are interlinked.
Y mucho más cuando el acuerdo de paz nos ofrece medidas para apoyar a frenar la deforestación y el cambio climático.
And this is even more urgent because the peace accord offers us clear measures in which to kind of address environmental damage and climate change.
Necesitamos seguir aumentando los niveles de implementación del acuerdo de paz.
We need to improve the implementation of the peace accord.
Por otro lado, también necesitamos fortalecer el papel de las comunidades locales.
On the other side, we also need to strengthen the role of local communities.
Porque sin la voz de ellos es difícil que cualquier programa que hagamos como gobierno funcione.
Because without their voice, it's very difficult that any program that the government implements works.
One more.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
I got a presentation, please. Sorry, I'm gonna try to present it in English, but I'm not that fluent, so sorry for that, and thank you for being patient with me. Okay, so I'm gonna try to explain the links between conflict, armed conflict, and environmental damage and extractive economies, specifically in the Atrato, to understand why in Colombia is happening what is happening now, that Alejandro just introduced us. So here is the Atrato River. This is let me see. Oh, yeah. So to understand in the map, the Atrato is located in the northwest corner of South America, in the frontier between Colombia and Panama. It flows to the Caribbean Ocean through a very dense and rich rainforest, and it represents all the Atrato Connect, very huge fluvial network, yeah, with more than 19 rivers and 300 of streams. The Atrato region is one of the most or the rainiest regions in the world. But the Atrato, there's not only an hydro or a fluvial network, but also a cultural network. The Atrato connects the ethnic communities that live in that region. So this is a very particular also in Colombia, because it's like 97% community territories. Sorry. So in the map you can see all the Atrato basin. In blue there is the ownership, collective ownership of Black communities, authorities, and in the red you can see the territories of indigenous people. So there is a completely ethnic territory. So these kind of groups have inhabit this territory, and they are developing a way of life that try to avoid the overexploitation of the common goods, and they instead they have are organizing their productive activities, respecting the cycles of their nature. During the whole year, there are a time specifically for the agriculture, for mining, for logging. There are, of course, time for Hollywoods and for the Humanitarian celebration that it's a central part of the life. Yeah, there is a time for every activity. That this is in order to protect the territory and to respect the limits that the nature talks to us. But in this region, there are many interests. We can identify two, especially. One of them is the economic interest in the natural resources. There are many commodities on there. So there are many industries that want to take control of this area. We can see the gold mining, also the logging, also the agro business, especially from oil palm and banana. There are monoculturing, and finally, sorry, I can see the presentation because it's too small for my eyes. Yeah, but there is a way in general to acercar.
¿Quieres ponerte acá? ¿O cambiamos?
Maybe. Sí. Sorry. Yeah. Hola, hola. Even with glasses, I can't see very well. Sorry. Yeah, and the livestock farming. This kind of industries have expanded the agricultural borders. Okay. So just to take gold mining as an example, because it's one of the most damaging activities, we can see that all these activities were traditional in the past, and they are part of the ancestral productivity in the zone, but there are foreign actors who want to take control of this. For example, the mining, it's part of the identity of the indigenous and also black communities. Actually, it's because of the interests of the Spanish crown in the times of the conquest that were taken from Africa a lot of enslaved people and were brought to our country to work in the mining districts. When they gave emancipate, they reivindicate the gold mining as a part of their identity. So they continue doing this activity, but as I said, it's just in a specific time of the year that complementing the agriculture, the fishing, the survival activities, and in respecting some limits. But in the 90s, came from different parts of the country and also from Brazil and other countries of the continent, some actors. There were informal but technified, and they started to accelerate the exploitation. So they don't respect the limits of the territory, just they want to maximize their incomes. So they brought, like these huge machines. They are called dredge and retroexcavadoras, sorry, backhoes. Excavator, okay. You can see in the picture, sorry. So they have a lot of environmental damages, and there are no environmental authorities that control these activities. Okay, so all the agro-industrial, the mining, the the activities that I said have these elements in common. So they are very cost efficient because they are based on the overexploitation. And for them, the forest is not part of the system like for the communities is, but is an obstacle. So they want to remove the forest, so that's why they produce a lot of deforestation in one of these pristine zones in the past. Also, they are illegal in a big majority, or they abuse of the rules of the law, and also they abuse or they take advantage from the weak of the institutional authorities, and also sometimes there are a corruption process or links between these economic actors and the politics or the public entities. And finally, there established links between armed actors. So there are collaboration relationship. So the armed actors provide security for these informal economic actors, and in return, the economic actors paid for this security. So this exploitation supports the war in Colombia, and also the violence is like a catalyzer of this exploitation. They increase the production because there are many interested in that. A second kind of interest in this part of our country is for controlling the trade. It's the Atrato and this part of Chocó is very geostrategic because it connects the mountains with the coast. They connect two oceans, the Pacific and the Caribbean, the Atlantic, so quickly. And because it's a forest, it's very easy to hide from the authorities. So it's like a very good territory for armed groups. So with the time, go there many guerrillas and also paramilitaries group. And the community has in the middle of this violence, trying to control the trade, white trade for the gold mining, the logging, but also for a natural trade of the world, the arms, and in our country, the cocaine or some drugs. So they are trying to take the control of the zone to control the transit that also give money to these groups. So to have a general view of the situation, we can see in the lower basin, like agriculture and livestock activities, in the middle, gold mining, and in the upper basin, also gold mining. And in the whole basin, logging, and the Atrato, it's a transit for drugs. This relationship between war and economics has many impacts. So we can identify three kinds of impacts. The first one is the armed group established like a violent order of the territory. So they imposed a restriction on the traffic, so the communities can use the territory in a free way. They impose also schedules or there are a lot of threatened selective murders, confinements forced displacements because the communities doesn't feel no guarantees of security there at all. And of course, they establish the way of production. So the ethnic authorities who in the past have rules about how to make the administration, stewardship of the of the land. Now the authorities are unrespected for these armed groups. We got some data here. So between in the date of from 1996 to 2006, we can see 70 massacres, more than 2,700 returns. Well, you can see the impacts of the violence there. Also, there are environmental impacts because of the mining. They destroy the ecosystem, they remove the forest, the soil. There are a lot of pollution of the water, specifically with a very toxic element like mercurio that is used in the gold mining to separate the gold from the rocks. Yeah, a lot of loss of biodiversity. And this kind of, those kind of impacts produce the biocultural damage. So they broke the social network. So the trust, the tranquility, the collective style of life of the communities has been broken. Of course, the food security has been affected too, because the fishing, the agriculture for surviving, there are not places to continue doing it, yeah, and they are losing their culture. But the communities has fighting historically for their rights. They got the collective owner of their lands, and they fight a lot against the state for their rights. So they do it in this case also. So they go to court and they presented lawsuit to demand a response from the state for all the damages. Yeah, and the main idea was the river have to be repaired, because the river is the life for the communities. So if the river die, the communities are going to die. If the river is sick, the communities are going to be sick. So they say we need to pay attention to the Atrato. The court in the 2016, the same year of the peace agreement, decide this case with the ruling T622. And for the third time in the world, the court officially granted rights to a river, introduced the natural rights precedent, based on the idea that for the communities, the river is alive and needs the support for the cultural life, their spiritual life, the biodiverse life of the region. Yes, and of course the court ordered some interventions in the area, controlling specifically the gold mining activity, and also the court ordered to repair the environment and also the product activities, traditional production, in order to reestablish the culture. Yeah, so now Marjorie is going to tell us how has been the implementation of this ruling and also the job of the guardians that are the voice of the Atrato River. Thank you.
La proyección.
¿Tú la ves? ¿Ves la pantalla?
Sí, no hay problema porque son solo imágenes. Buenas noches.
Good evening.
¿Noches? Sí. Las comunidades practicamos una filosofía sudafricana que se llama Ubuntu, que es soy porque somos. Ubuntu. Ubu.
So the communities in Chocó practice a South African philosophy which is called Ubuntu, which is I am, therefore we are, or I am because we are.
Y es más que un llamado a la solidaridad, y por eso estamos hoy aquí, gracias a CAFO, a Esquiá, a Colombia, a Jan, a la Universidad de Glasgow, a la diócesis de Quito y por supuesto las organizaciones guardianas de la cuenca del Atrato, perdón, también siembra.
And it's also a call to solidarity, and we're here thanks to the support of organizations like SCIAF, CAFOD, AB Colombia, the Diocese of Quibdó, Siembra, the University of Glasgow, and obviously it's important to mention the organizations from the river basin in Chocó.
Bueno, espero resumir un poco todo lo que ha pasado con la sentencia en estos 5 años.
I hope I can kind of offer you a quick resume or a quick synopsis of all of the work that we've done in the last 5 years around the implementation of the court ruling.
Y no emocionarme mucho porque me apasiona demasiado, entonces.
And I'm not going to get too emotional because I'm very passionate about the issue.
Bueno, posteriormente del fallo de la sentencia, de la tutela como tal,
So after the court ruling, T622,
la organización lo que hicimos fue tratar de interpretar lo que la Corte Constitucional ordenaba, ¿no?
so what we did as organizations was try to interpret what the court ruling actually said.
Y era entender cada una de las órdenes, pero también revisar cómo íbamos a afrontar el desafío de la sentencia.
So what we tried to do was understand each of the orders of the court ruling or each of the kind of clauses of the court ruling, but also try to understand what we were going to do to face the challenges that this court ruling kind of implied for us.
Siempre lo he dicho, la sentencia era un desafío de por sí, tanto institucional como comunitario.
So the court ruling was a challenge in itself, both for institutions and for communities.
Por ser la primera en Colombia y la tercera en el mundo.
Because it was so pioneering. It was the first in Colombia and the third in the world that recognized the river as a bearer of rights.
No teníamos un modelo de qué pegarnos o un modelo a seguir.
There was no model to follow.
Pero también frente a la digamos, debilidad institucional que tenemos.
But we also had to face the institutional weakness that we have in Colombia.
Y el primer desafío fue lograr llamar la atención de las instituciones demandadas.
And the first thing we had to do was call the institutions that had been called out as part of the court ruling. We had to kind of call their attention to this fact.
Para acelerar el cumplimiento de las órdenes, ¿no?
So that they could speed up their compliance with the court ruling.
Y lo primero que hicimos fue cumplir un poco la orden cuarta de la sentencia que habla de crear la comisión de guardianes.
So the first thing that we did was try to comply with the fourth order of the court ruling, which was to create the commission of guardians.
Okay. Pero quiero que nos detengamos un rato, me acelero un poco.
But first, I want to go back a wee bit because I'm going ahead of myself.
Quiero que veamos estos conceptos sobre el río.
First, I want us to kind of stop and look at these concepts about the river.
En un ejercicio de poder entender lo que representa el río para nosotros.
because it's an important exercise to understand what the river actually means to us.
Me da la tarea de preguntar a varias personas qué significaba el río para ellas.
She asked various people what the river meant to them.
Le pregunto a una amiga del interior del país qué significa el río y me contesta que simplemente era una fuente hídrica donde iban a nadar de vez en cuando.
So I asked a friend who lives in the interior of the country, what does the river mean to her? And she said, well, it's a source of water and sometimes we go and swim there.
Mientras tanto, una mujer indígena me dice que es una fuente de vida porque sin ella no, es la madre tierra que organiza todo, ¿cierto?
Whereas an indigenous woman said that it was the source of life because the Mother Earth organizes everything.
Mientras tanto, una niña de 11 años me dice, el río es fuente de vida, es nuestro único medio de transporte y representa nuestra identidad.
Whereas an 11-year-old girl told me that it was a source of life, it was our way of transport, our way of getting around, and also important to our identity.
Entonces yo creo que ahí no hubo más de poder, la respuesta estaba clara. ¿Por qué el río es tan importante para las comunidades que vivimos sobre él o asentadas en él?
And I think these offer really clear responses as to why the river is so important for the communities who live alongside it or along with it.
Quiero que veamos también un poco nuestra relación real con el río.
I would also like us to look a wee bit at the relationship, the real relationship we have with our river.
Como pueden ver, el río es nuestra lavadora,
So as you can see, the river is our washing machine.
nuestro centro de recreación, de turismo,
It's our recreational center. It's our tourist center where we have fun.
nuestra fuente económica,
Our economic, the source of our wealth, our economy.
como pueden ver, medio de transporte,
It's our transport system.
actividades culturales,
We use it for cultural activities.
un poco esto que vemos allí. Una de mis pasiones también tomar fotos.
So he's just going to take a photograph. So she's going to just leave it there for a second.
Y esto es la realidad.
And that's our reality.
Estas son fotografías de hace poco, 2017, 2018.
So these photographs are from not long ago, from 2017, 2018.
Y esta es la razón de ser de la sentencia.
And because of these, you can see in these photos that why we need this court ruling.
Garantizar la supervivencia de las comunidades que vivimos allí y que estamos ligados con el territorio.
Because we need to guarantee the survival of communities who live there, because we're so inextricably linked to our land or our territory.
Bueno, espero no extenderme, pero la sentencia tiene un elemento muy que para mí me llena, o sea, yo creo que para mí la más importante, que es ese enfoque biocultural.
So the court ruling has what for me is one of the most important kind of elements, which is its biocultural emphasis or biocultural approach.
Y es que la sentencia reconoce esa relación que tenemos con la naturaleza, con la cultura y la forma como nos relacionamos con ellas.
Because this biocultural approach recognizes the relationship, the inextricable relationship we have with nature, with our culture, and how we relate, you know, within ourselves and our natural environment.
Las comunidades étnicas estamos tan ligadas al territorio que una de las prácticas culturales que se realiza son sembrar el ombligo cuando nacemos, cuando lo cortan en la tierra.
So the ethnic communities in Chocó have such a tight relationship with their territory that one of the practices that we do is that we bury or sow our belly button when we're, well, we don't do it when we're born, but somebody sews it on our behalf when we're born. The umbilical cord, sorry. The belly button's what's left.
Y por eso estamos tan ligados, somos uno solo.
And that because it's the umbilical cord that shows how linked we are to our territory.
Bueno, tendremos más tiempo de hablar de lo biocultural un poco. La comisión de guardianes, entonces un primer, voy a hablar muy fogoso, gol que le metimos a la Corte Constitucional.
So the Commission of Guardians was the kind of first goal we scored against the Constitutional Court.
Es que la Corte dijo 2 guardianes, uno por el Estado y uno por las comunidades.
Because the Constitutional Court originally suggested that there would only be 2 guardians, one on behalf of the community and one on behalf of the state.
El Estado, bajo el decreto 1148, delegó en su guardián al Ministerio de Ambiente.
So the state, under the Decree 1148, delegated the responsibility of the state guardian to the Ministry of Environment.
Y nosotros decidimos, bajo la autonomía, crear un cuerpo colegiado de guardianes que en realidad sería uno.
And we decided under our kind of, with our own autonomy, that we would have a kind of a body of guardians.
Entonces estamos representados en 7 organizaciones,
So our territories are represented in 7 organizations,
14 guardianes,
14 guardians,
8 hombres y 6 mujeres.
8 men, 1 woman, or 6 women.
Y ellos conformamos lo que es el cuerpo colegiado de guardianes.
So we can form this kind of body of guardians, this collegiate of guardians.
Y estamos ubicados desde el nacimiento del río Atrato hasta su desembocadura.
And we're located all along the river Atrato, from its mouth to where it meets the sea.
Entonces ahí ya teníamos el cumplimiento de la orden 4ª de la sentencia, que era crear la comisión de guardianes junto con el Ministerio de Ambiente. Entonces esta comisión de guardianes está amparada a una resolución que es la 0907 del 2018.
So in that sense, we were able to comply with this Rule 4 of the court ruling, alongside the Ministry of Environment, with the Decree 0907 of the court ruling.
Segundo desafío,
The second challenge,
cumplir, digamos, lograr que la institucionalidad se sentara de tú a tú a hablar con nosotros.
and the second challenge was to kind of try and get state institutions to sit down and speak to us face to face.
En Colombia la institucionalidad no acostumbra a coordinar, interlocutar con las comunidades, ¿no? Bajo de tomar una misma decisión, trabajar juntos para llegar a un mismo objetivo, ¿no?
So in Colombia, state institutions don't tend to communicate well with communities. Instead, they make the decisions and kind of impose them upon communities.
La lectura es: yo soy el técnico y usted hace lo que yo le voy a proponer.
So the kind of reading is, I'm the technical expert here, and you're going to do what I tell you to do, or what I propose.
Pero entonces la sentencia era muy clara, decía: todo hay que articularlo con las comunidades.
But this is where the court ruling was very clear, because it said that everything needed to be articulated and agreed with communities.
Son uno solo hacia el cumplimiento de un mismo objetivo, ¿no?
Because we're working towards complying or meeting the same objective.
Y en ese ejercicio empezamos a articularnos con el Ministerio de Ambiente, el otro guardián,
So we began working with the Ministry of Environment, who's the other guardian,
pero que también tenía la responsabilidad en la orden de descontaminación del río Atrato.
and the Ministry of Environment was also responsible, according to the court ruling, as well as being a guardian, but also responsible for decontaminating or cleaning up the river Atrato.
Y allí empezamos a hacer un ejercicio de construir lo que se llama plan de acción, que era lo primero que decía para el cumplimiento de la orden. Un plan de acción para contar el cómo voy a hacerlo, ¿cierto? Cómo voy a cumplir la orden.
So we began to kind of co-construct or to develop together action plans as to how they were going to follow and comply with the court ruling.
Hicimos un ejercicio muy bonito de participación comunitaria, de construcción del plan.
And so we carried out a very nice exercise where communities participated in the construction of these action plans.
Logramos llevar casi 30 funcionarios del Ministerio de Ambiente a llenarse de barro, como decimos nosotros.
And we managed to get 30 civil servants to kind of, you know, in this mud, to kind of join us in this great kind of avalanche of mud. That's a very loose translation, if anybody has a better one, that we have in Chocó.
Y recorrer todos los municipios de la cuenca y escuchar a las comunidades y construir con las comunidades lo que se quería.
And these 30 civil servants kind of traveled all across or all through the Atrato and heard from, you know, different municipalities, different communities, straight from them.
Y finalmente, después de varios tropiezos, 2019 de diciembre, firmamos el plan de acción de esa orden, de la orden de contaminación del río Atrato.
And eventually, in December 2019, after a few kind of obstacles on the way, we managed to kind of sign this action plan, or agree this action plan.
Un poco es cómo funciona también la Comisión de Guardianes. La Comisión de Guardianes sesiona cada 2 meses. Son espacios de análisis y reflexión frente al cumplimiento de la sentencia.
So just to let you know how the Commission of Guardians works, we meet, we have sessions every 6 months which are about reflection and evaluation to evaluate how the court ruling has been implemented.
Y es por eso también que logramos que el ministro anterior de Ambiente fuera cada 2 meses aquí, sentarse de tú a tú con nosotros a dialogar, ¿no?
And that was how we managed that the previous Minister of Environment would actually sat down to talk to us face as equals.
Otra ganancia, porque ningún ministro se va a sentar cada 2 meses con una comunidad al menos a escuchar, ¿no?
Because most ministers won't sit down every couple of months and talk or listen.
Está una orden que tiene que ver con todo el tema de neutralizar la minería mecanizada, de lo que nos contaba Viviana en el territorio.
There's another order which is about neutralizing the mechanized mining that Viviana spoke about in her presentation.
Evitar el ingreso de insumos contaminantes también al territorio.
And also to avoid or prevent the entry of toxic substances to the territory.
Y esa quizá es una de las órdenes de mayor discusión, digamos, operativa de la orden.
And this is perhaps one of the most controversial elements of the court ruling in terms of implementation.
Porque esa orden está en cabeza del Ministerio de Defensa y todos sabemos más cómo opera el Ministerio de Defensa y más en Colombia.
Because this particular work package or this particular order is under the charge of the Ministry of Defense, and we all know how the Ministry of Defense works in Colombia.
Entonces, esta orden, el Ministerio de Defensa solamente lo que hace es quemar maquinarias.
So all that the Ministry of Defense does is burn these machines, these massive machines that Viviana showed us. All they do is kind of burn them out.
Que para nosotros también es un foco de contaminación.
And they leave the kind of shells there, so that's also a point of pollution or contamination.
La maquinaria se quema, riega combustible, el humo también contamina y la maquinaria queda donde se quema.
So they torch the machinery. Obviously, that leads to kind of diesel and petrol spillages in the river. The smoke, which contaminates the air, and then they just leave the kind of the husk of the machines in the river.
Y el Ministerio de Defensa no tiene una política de chatarrización, de manejo de esa maquinaria después del incendio, ¿no? De la quema.
So the Ministry of Defense should have a kind of a scrappage policy.
Y alegan no tener presupuesto para ello, sabiendo que el mayor presupuesto de Colombia es para el Ministerio de Defensa.
But it says that it doesn't have the budget for the scrappage And we all know that the biggest public spending in Colombia is for the Ministry of Defense.
Está una orden que tiene que ver con todo el tema de recuperación de las prácticas tradicionales de producción, que tiene que ver con todo el tema productivo alimentario del territorio.
There's also another element of the court order, which is about the recuperation of traditional productive activities, which has to do with food sovereignty and economic activities.
Bajo el concepto de no desarrollo y planes de vida, que son esas visiones de desarrollo que tenemos las comunidades étnicas en Colombia.
And this is conceptualized or envisaged under the concepts of ethno-development and life plans that ethnic communities have developed in Colombia.
Y está la orden de estudios toxicológicos y epidemiológicos.
There's also toxicology and epidemiology studies that are contemplated in the court ruling.
Que cuando estoy con la comunidad le digo estudios de exámenes de sangre y de pelo y ya.
When she's with communities, she just says blood tests and skin tests, which is easier to say. Given
Para
the
no
struggle.
enredarlos. Y el Ministerio de Salud, que es en cabeza que ya avanzó en los estudios.
And so the Health Ministry has has advanced these studies.
Pero estamos esperando los resultados finales, informes finales de lo que pasó o lo que consiguieron, ¿no?
But we're still waiting for the results to find out what happened.
Pero más de lo que ha pasado con las órdenes, quiero centrarme en lo que hemos hecho como comunidad y como guardianes.
But more than what's happened with the court ruling, I'd kind of like to talk about what we're doing as guardians and what's happening at a community level.
Y nuestro primer talón de Aquiles es que la Corte Constitucional en ningún, aparte de la sentencia, garantizaba recursos para que los guardianes ejerciéramos nuestra función.
So our big Achilles heel is that apart from the court ruling, the Constitution Court doesn't guarantee any funding for our actions.
Y esta ha sido una de las mayores limitaciones que hemos tenido como comunidad.
And that's been one of the biggest limitations we've had as a community.
Porque no tenemos cómo acceder a cada una de las comunidades que tiene la cuenca, una cuenca demasiado extensa.
Because we can't, we haven't had the resources to reach every community, given the kind of the size of the river basin.
Pero es un ejercicio que hemos hecho con la ayuda de muchos de los que están aquí, mucha cooperación.
But we have managed to carry out this exercise with the support of many of the organizations that are here today, international development organizations.
Y hemos centrado nuestro trabajo en, creo que 3 elementos importantes.
So we've kind of focused our work on 3 key elements.
Un proceso de pedagogía y formación hacia adentro del territorio.
So working to kind of build capacity and build knowledge within the territory.
Empoderar a nuestras comunidades de la sentencia.
So that our communities can empower themselves with the court ruling.
Un proceso de incidencia hacia adentro, pero también hacia afuera.
So our advocacy processes have been within communities and towards communities, but also outside.
Hacia adentro para impulsar el cumplimiento de la sentencia.
So we've engaged in advocacy activities within our communities to kind of promote
Con
the
institucionalidades.
compliance of the court ruling. So with institutions.
Y hacia afuera con agencias de cooperación.
And our external advocacy activities have been mainly with international development actors.
Para sumar aliados a todo el trabajo que hacemos.
So that they can join us as allies in all of the work that we do.
Y no pasa. Esta es un poco la historia de lo que hacemos en territorio.
So this gives you a sense of what we do in our territory.
Hemos centrado mucho la pedagogía en jóvenes y en niños.
We've worked a lot in terms of capacity building or education with young people and children,
porque ahí está el gran potencial en el territorio, de salvar el territorio.
because that's where the great potential for saving our territory is.
Son los futuros representantes legales de los consejos comunitarios, los resguardos indígenas y los próximos administradores del territorio también.
So those are the future officers of the Community Council and the indigenous authorities, and they're also the future stewards of the territory.
Un poco. Entonces, solo imágenes. Y la incidencia, con cooperación, hemos visitado demasiado, embajada de Austria, embajada de Unión Europea, delegación de la Unión Europea, hemos hecho incidencia nacional, hemos hecho incidencia internacional, acciones como esta, contando lo que hacemos y llamando la atención a sumarse a ser guardián.
In terms of our external advocacy activities, we've done loads. We visited different embassies, Austria, the EU delegation. We've engaged in advocacy processes at a national and international level. Events like this where we're making a kind of inviting you to join us as guardians of the river.
Y un poco el trabajo institucional articulado con las instituciones.
And we've also tried to articulate our efforts with state institutions.
Poco el ejercicio que hacemos en las comunidades, el trabajo colectivo de construcción colectiva.
So the work that we do in our communities is about collective construction.
Poco. Y hemos construido herramientas pedagógicas para llevar la sentencia a varios públicos, ¿no?
And we've also generated or developed educational kind of tools or educational methodology to bring, to raise awareness about the sentence within different publics.
Hemos identificado que no es lo mismo explicar la sentencia a un académico que a una persona que no sabe leer.
So it's very different to explain what the court ruling is to an academic compared to explaining what the court ruling is to someone who can't read or write.
Nuestras comunidades son mucho más orales y entonces a través de la tradición oral también explicamos la sentencia a través de, no sé acá cómo le dicen, coplas, versos, poemas, canciones.
So we have a very strong oral tradition, so we use that to explain the court ruling, so poems, rhymes, songs, etc.
Y estas imágenes que vemos allí son algunos de los materiales que hemos construido.
And what you're seeing here is some of the tools that we've developed.
Tenemos Majestuoso Atrato, que fue nuestro primer libro.
So we've got, our first book was called The Majestic Atrato.
Tenemos la primera cartilla de sentencia resumida.
So there's a kind of a 101 on what the sentence is, kind of in synthesis.
Ya la actualizamos, ya la tenemos con lo que ha pasado con el cumplimiento de cada una de las órdenes.
And this is something that we have updated to show how the implementation has progressed.
Tenemos infografía.
We use infographics.
Un periódico que tenemos como
We have a
un
little
mes, ¿no?
newspaper.
Tenemos esta campaña que es Todos y todas somos guardianes del río Atrato.
We have this campaign, which is We Are All Guardians of the Atrato.
Tenemos nuestras redes sociales,
Social media.
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, nuestra página web de guardianes que la pueden conseguir en español y en inglés.
And our web page is available in both Spanish and English.
La teníamos cerrada hace 2 meses por exceso de pago de dominio.
Although it came down 2 months ago because we weren't able to pay for it.
Y digamos que nos cerraron la página tristemente hace 2 meses porque pues no teníamos recursos, como le decía, no teníamos recursos para pagar el dominio y nosotros promocionando la página con mucha gente cuando nos decían, pero entramos y no vemos nada.
And you know, this speaks to what I was saying before about the lack of resources. We were kind of telling everybody about our great website, and we hadn't realized that we, you know, that we did realize that we didn't have the resources to pay for the domain name.
Gracias a una aliada nos las pagó hace 3 días.
So 3 days ago, one of our allies stepped in and has paid for the domain name.
Así que pueden entrar y revisar.
So please do enter or visit our webpage.
Y es una página que está muy completa. Nos toca actualizar estos meses que estuvo sin funcionar. Pero es muy bonita porque la construimos entre todos.
So it's very up to date. Please visit it. But one of the things that is lovely about it is that it's something that was collectively developed.
Bueno, para no hacerme esto, la invitación es a todos los que están aquí a sumarse a ser guardianas y guardianes del río Atrato. Creo que es importante desde lo que tenemos poder donar un poco a este ejercicio, ya sea académicamente, ya sea asesorando, ya sea ayudándonos a buscar aliados, financiadores. Es importante apoyar o convertirse en guardián desde la distancia. El simple hecho de
So I invite you all to become guardians of the River Atrato and you know, kind of donate your time, your energy from whatever space you inhabit, whether that's academic, whether that's just keeping an eye on things, whether that's helping us find allies, whether that's financial support. So you're all invited to be guardians of the Atrato.
Entonces, quiero cerrar con el lema que tenemos los guardianes, con un lema que nace también de la filosofía Ubuntu y que nuestro consejero de cabecera, el padre Sterling, que creo que algunos de los que están aquí lo conocen, escribió la sentencia y es Atrato soy. Me gustaría que repitiera.
Hang on. So I'm going to finish with this slogan, which also kind of is built from the Ubuntu philosophy. And many of you here will know, and certainly he's been here in Glasgow, Father Sterling Londoño, who's our counsellor and our advisor. So this slogan was kind of thought of by Padre Sterling.
Lo voy a decir, pero cuando terminemos el evento, la idea es que lo hagamos en video para las comunidades.
So I'm going to say it, but the idea is that we say it together when I finish, and we record that as a message of solidarity to our communities.
Entonces, con calma. Atrato soy. Atrato somos. Ah, no, esto me pasó. Atrato es.
Atrato es.
Atrato somos. Soy.
Atrato soy.
Atrato somos.
Atrato somos.
Y debemos seguir siendo.
Y debemos decir.
Bueno, al final hacemos con coreografía y todo.
So now we're going to say it together. Okay? Oh, what does it mean? Oh, sorry. It's that time of the evening. So it means Atrato, I am the Atrato, we are the Atrato es. Y la última frase.
Atrato soy. Y debemos seguir siendo.
And we should continue to be the Atrato.
Disculpamos que estamos hablando español chocuano.
No, está bien.
Yo que sí, para cerrar un poquito. Pues me extiendo mucho, entonces mejor le damos oportunidades para que ustedes pregunten.
Okay. Yeah.
Sí.
See? So she's opening it up. So thank you. Arjun, she's going to finish there. And before we get you all at the end, we will give you a glass of wine before we get you to collectively say the Atrato soy, Atrato somos. But before we do that, we just wanted to kind of open up to see if anybody has any questions for any members of tonight's panel. Estoy abriendo a preguntas. And Alan and David both have mics, so if you just raise your hand. They will give you a chance to speak. Don't all shout at once because I really can't handle it.
Is this on? Yeah. I actually have a question from one of our virtual participants on YouTube.
Entonces hay una pregunta de los participantes virtuales.
So from Elizabeth Driver, who's a student here at the University of Glasgow.
Una estudiante de la Universidad de Glasgow.
She would like to ask Marjorie, which aspect of your work has brought the greatest reward so far? Have there been any methods that the Guardians have tried and found to be kind of most effective?
Entonces es una pregunta para Marjorie. ¿Qué aspecto de tu trabajo te ha dado como más satisfacción? Y what was the second bit?
So what methods for the Guardians have been most effective?
¿Y qué metodología que ha utilizado los guardianes ha sido más efectivo en cuanto a impacto? O sea, ¿cuál te ha dado más satisfacción y cuáles de los mecanismos han tenido más impacto?
Ok. Bueno, yo vengo trabajando con las comunidades más allá de la sentencia, antes de sentencia.
So I've been working with communities from way before the court ruling.
Pues soy hija de un gran líder a quien admiro mucho.
She's the daughter of a great leader who she admires a lot.
Y una de las satisfacciones es uno responder como al legado de él.
And one of my great satisfactions is to respond to his legacy.
Pero también tener claro que muchas personas que no tienen voz
And also it's important to be clear that many people who don't have a voice
ven en mí es la persona con la que pueden transmitir lo que quieren, ¿no?
see the ways that I can amplify their voice.
Y otra cosa que me llena de satisfacción es poder haber logrado incidir en muchos jóvenes de mi territorio.
And one of the things that most satisfies me is having been able to work with and have an impact in the young people of my territory.
Que empezaron conmigo en un proceso de formación.
Who began a process of capacity building with me.
Junto con un abogado de la diócesis, Viviana y yo.
Together with a lawyer from the Diocese of Quibdó and Viviana.
Formábamos estos chicos que luego se convirtieron en formadores de otros chicos.
So we engaged in a process of capacity building, of training of these young people, and then they multiplied it or replicated it with other young people.
Y yo siempre les decía que la esperanza del territorio estaba en ellos.
And I always said that the hope of our territory was with them.
Y que tenían el compromiso de acceder a los espacios de toma de decisiones dentro de nuestras organizaciones.
And that we needed to kind of embrace that commitment where they would have access to the spaces of power where decisions are made in our territories.
Y hoy ya tenemos nuestro primer representante legal.
And now we have our first legal representative.
Y es uno de los chicos que formamos, entonces esas son de las cosas que más me llenan.
And he's one of the young people who participated in this training program.
Y en el marco de la sentencia,
in the framework of the court ruling,
creo que el ejercicio de participación de las comunidades dentro de la implementación
I think the fact that the community participated as part of the implementation process.
La estrategia que utilizamos para garantizar la participación de cada uno de los actores claves del territorio.
We implemented a strategy to try and guarantee the participation of each and every one of the key actors in the territory.
Ha funcionado muy bien.
And this strategy has really worked well.
Pero también el elemento pedagógico.
But also the kind of pedagogical element to this.
Sí, hacia adentro también, pero también hacia afuera. También posicionar la sentencia hacia afuera también.
So in terms of the pedagogical element, working with communities to raise awareness, conscientization of the sentence has worked within communities, but also helped us to kind of form a position towards external actors.
a question for Viviana. So you were talking about essentially external actors that were exploiting this land. Do you know if these actors were connected to multinational firms, or were they selling these products on the black market domestically? Or, yeah, I would love some background on which actors are actually intervening in this area. And if it's in multinationals, for example, do they know about it? Do their supply chains, do they know about the impacts throughout their supply chains as well?
Well, the illegal mining, it's a real problem now, but the legal one, it's also a threat for the territory. Actually, a big part, like the 30% of the Atrato Basin, has been titled to international or multinational mining companies. And actually, the government policy about the mining, or the way that they want to combat the illegal mining, is trying to convert to legal mining with big companies. So this is actually a biggest problem or a big challenge, because they want to increase the production. So as we can explain, the problem is the exploitation of the territory, and they want to follow this line, but now in the hands of multinational companies. And the companies now are there, actually. They are trying to talk with the ethnic communities, and they want to start some consulta previa, I don't know how to...
Consultation. Prior and informed consultation, which is a right that was established through the Constitution of 1991 for Black and Indigenous communities in Colombia.
Yeah, so they are starting some kind of negotiation or presenting to the communities the project with many, creating many expectations, like this is the way that we are going to solve the problem. But actually in Colombia, there are many international mining companies, not about gold, but about coal. And we can see in this region the violation of the human rights. It's very worried, you know. And also there are some links between a multinational company and paramilitaries group. So for us, that is not a solution, that it will be a big step in the problem.
Any further questions? Okay. Marjorie, ¿tú querías agregar algo? ¿Está bien?
No, pues quería como hacer un análisis un poco sobre el discurso del gobierno frente a la responsabilidad ambiental en Colombia.
It's important just to kind of have a very brief reflection on the environmental discourse of the current Colombian government.
Uno es que la percepción que lo tengo, pues, en términos personales, no sé.
So this is her personal reflection.
El discurso de Colombia frente al cambio climático, todo el tema ambiental hacia afuera es muy distinto a lo que hace realmente en territorio.
So the discourse that the Colombian government has around climate crisis or climate change is very different to how it acts on a national level or on a community level.
Los defensores de derechos ambientales somos vulnerables.
So environmental defenders are very vulnerable.
No ratificamos acuerdos como el de Escazú, que tiene que ver con todo el tema de protección y participación de los defensores y defensoras de derechos humanos.
No ratificamos, perdón.
Ratificamos, firmamos.
Oh, they don't.
Firma.
Sí.
Signal.
Yeah, no entiendo, pero ¿qué es lo que no ratifican?
Escazú. Escazú.
So sorry, they don't ratify the agreement of Escazú.
Los temas ambientales, los procesos ambientales o temas ambientales son los que menos presupuesto tienen.
Environmental work on environmental issues has the least budget.
Muchas veces no hay voluntad política para apoyar estos procesos.
Generally, there's no political will to support these processes.
El tema de deforestación en Colombia está más centrado hacia el Amazonas,
When they talk about deforestation in Colombia, they focus more on the Amazon.
pero quizá el Chocó biográfico esté mucho más vulnerado
But the Chocó bioregion is much more vulnerable
por todos los intereses extractivos que hay en el territorio, en los territorios étnicos especialmente.
due to the variety of extractive interests in the ethnic territories.
Pero siento que los esfuerzos económicos y presupuestales y voluntad política se centran solo en una parte del territorio.
But in terms of budgetary support, in terms of economic resources, only a very small part reaches that local level.
Que internacionalmente puede verse como un gran trabajo, pero se están dejando atrás muchos los territorios de los que dependemos muchas comunidades.
And while internationally they might seem to be doing a great job, there's a big gap in terms of how communities who have great need are living.
Creo que hay que apoyar todo el ejercicio que las comunidades hacemos en defensa y protección del medio ambiente,
So in terms of all of the work that communities do in defense and to protect the natural environment,
pero frente al tema de deforestación hay que, como digo, voltear de otra manera,
turn it around.
voltear la mirada hacia el Chocó.
But in terms of deforestation, we really need to focus our gaze in on Chocó. Otra pregunta.
Yes, we have another question from one of our virtual participants for Alejandro and Newt. So the question is, how do you think the Colombian government can be persuaded to act? Do you think voices from Colombia or international voices are most effective in promoting action?
Okay. ¿Cómo crees que el gobierno de Colombia, cómo crees que podemos convencer al gobierno de Colombia a cambiar de actuar? ¿Sería mejor voces desde Colombia o voces de afuera? O sea, ¿cómo se pueden seguir?
Can begin? I think some of the challenges in Colombia as well, it's been in conflict for the last half a century, and that is kind of symptomatic of Colombia as well, as the government doesn't have any territorial control, so it's quite limited also what the state is able to do, even though and sometimes it's willing but it's not able, and sometimes it's not even willing to do it. So that is a challenge, and you can see that in particular in the region in Chocó and in Darien, in the Gulf of Urabá, which has been a lawless territory for quite some time. The state has never really had a presence in that territory. And there was a question also in terms of which are the armed actors who are controlling the territory these days. I think now it's the Clan del Golfo. It's kind of a narcotics cartel, but which has its story from the paramilitaries. And before that also the guerrillas back in the 90s. So they captured the leader just a couple of weeks ago, I think. But he grew up in the 1980s in the guerrillas, he demobilized, then he went into the paramilitaries, they demobilized, and he continued. It's a long story. So I think it's needed both pressure from within Colombia, but also pressure from without. But what they need also in terms of is assistance to be able to develop these areas and to assist the populations to actually to enjoy their rights and to increase the state presence, not in terms of the military presence, but in the social institutions and the presence of that.
Sí, yo creo que tenemos que trabajar en tres niveles, en un nivel más internacional, nacional y local o comunitario.
So he thinks we need to work on 3 different levels: international, national, and local or community level.
Creo que es muy importante el acompañamiento que hace la comunidad internacional sobre estos temas.
The accompaniment of the international community around these themes, around these issues, is extremely important.
Llamando al gobierno a pues que saque leyes, pero creo que también que cumpla las leyes.
In terms of calling the government to account, yes, it's important that they develop laws, but it's also important that they implement and comply with these laws.
Hay una frase que los colombianos siempre decimos que es, tenemos muchas leyes, pero no se cumple casi ninguna.
We have a phrase in Colombia, and I think I used it the other day in our Latin American politics class. I see somebody in the back. In Colombia we have a lot of laws, but they're not implemented and they're not respected.
Y creo que la comunidad internacional puede ayudar a hacer como seguimiento a la implementación de ciertas leyes.
And I think the international community has a role in following up and ensuring that these certain laws are implemented.
Creo que en el nivel nacional el mejor ejemplo es lo que pasó con la sentencia.
I think at a national level, the best example we have is what has happened with this court ruling that we've been talking about.
Donde también como entes del Estado y no solo del gobierno, como que llaman al gobierno a proteger los derechos ambientales.
Where you see state institutions, not governmental institutions, but state institutions calling the government to account to implement these actions.
Esto es muy importante porque creo que hay una gran desconfianza entre la institucionalidad y la sociedad civil en Colombia.
And this is important because there's a real lack of trust between civil society and state institutions in Colombia.
Y esto puede ser una buena ruta para que para que avancemos en el diálogo y trabajemos juntos.
And this can be a really interesting or important route to embrace and encourage dialogue.
En el nivel comunitario, lo que están haciendo los guardianes con pedagogía.
At a community level, the work of the guardians, particularly in education.
Pero también protegiendo la vida de los líderes.
But also the important work that they do in terms of protecting the life of leaders.
Realmente para nosotros es un tema muy importante.
And this is a really crucial issue for us.
Hi, I had a question on deforestation as well, and it's for many of the panelists. So Colombia was one of the 100+ countries that agreed to or committed to ending deforestation by 2030. I was interested in your reaction to that and what issues, challenges, or opportunities might it present for your territory and your communities.
Entonces, la pregunta es sobre deforestación y como Colombia fue uno de los más de 100 países que firmó el acuerdo el otro día sobre deforestación para el 2030. Sí, está escrito aquí. Entonces, quiere saber, o sea, desde su perspectiva, cuáles serían los desafíos o oportunidades que presenta este acuerdo o el hecho que Colombia lo haya firmado. Quien quiera. Yo no voy a responder.
Yeah, I can say a little bit about it. I think the agreement is a good one. I think to halt the deforestation by 2030 is not really a new goal, but it was rephrased in a new way. So that's something that was already there. I think what is new is in terms of finance. So there's been a pledge now for about, I'm not sure how many, it's a substantial increase in the amounts to halt deforestation, both from institutional donors, but also from private sector. So that is very positive. Norway has been one of the proponents of this initiative from a few years back, and now we have more allies in that quest. So I think the initiative is very positive. We have to see how it translates to action on the ground, and I think that is some of the big challenges as well in terms of what mentioned earlier in terms in territorial control. So the government of Colombia can provide a statement saying that we will stop deforestation by 2030, but without having a state presence in those territories, they don't have the power to actually halt the deforestation. And I think that is going to remain a challenge even beyond 2030. And our response in terms of for the Caritas and in our projects to halt deforestation in Colombia, we need to empower the local communities. And we need to provide the local communities with opportunities, with alternatives to create livelihoods without deforestation. So that is our answer to that challenge, at least. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's a necessary agreement, but I think in Colombia it's unrealistic that it happened in 2030, because what the government is going to do with the miners, with the farmers, with the agro men. So the government can not only implement environmental measures, but also economic measures. We don't see the will of the government in trying to establish limits to these economies. They are trying to increase it, to promote it. So in these kind of scenarios, the government established some goal, but in the economic traits and they are attracting the investment of the miners, companies, and all the causes of the deforestation. So there are contradictory policies. So I see quite unrealistic to achieve this goal, but I think it's necessary. Yeah. So let's see.
Sí, yo creo que el principal reto que tiene esto es una visión muy, digo, militarista de la deforestación.
The biggest challenge we have is that the government has a very militarized notion of deforestation.
Porque como comentaba Viviana, se trata solamente de quemar las retroexcavadoras o las maquinarias que están utilizando para la deforestación.
As Viviana has commented, their way of responding is to burn the machinery that's used for the deforestation.
Pero no está brindando como herramientas reales de economía para los campesinos que están deforestando estas tierras.
But there's no productive alternatives being offered to rural communities who are engaging in deforestation.
Hay personas que tienen más poder y que contratan a campesinos para ir a forestar estas zonas y después apropiarse de estas tierras.
There are people who have a lot of power who are hiring peasant communities or agricultural workers to engage in deforestation, and then they go and appropriate these lands.
Y la respuesta del gobierno no es investigar a las personas con poder, sino mandar a los militares a capturar a los campesinos que fueron contratados por las personas.
And so the government response to this is not to investigate the people, if you like, the intellectual authors or the people who have power, but instead it's to arrest the workers who are cutting down the trees on behalf of these very powerful actors.
Mientras que no se haga una política integral para la deforestación, no solo pensado en ir a quemar las maquinarias, pues realmente esto no va a parar.
Until we have some kind of integrated approach to deforestation that goes way beyond just burning machinery, it's not really going to do much.
And for Colombia and also Latin America, the world have to talk about the drugs traffic and the policy of the consumption of drugs like cocaine, because the answer of the government is like eliminate these crops with glyphosate, that it's a toxic element. So yeah, all the alternatives of the government, it's military, and I think globally we have to talk with the consumers, with the transportation actors involved, with los estados receptores?
The countries, the consuming state, or the supply, the demand, where the demand is.
The gold, all these commodities. So there's not only a local problem, but also it's a problem to the states that receive this kind of elements. Yeah.
Gracias. Okay, I think if there's no more questions, I think we will. We have some wine and juice at the back, so we'll invite you to have a drink. But I would also, while you're here, invite you to look at these series of portraits. You might recognize the second one. And these portraits are done by Jan Nemo, who's a Glasgow-based artist, as part of a wider project linking up with all of the partners here present, called Rivers in Solidarity, or Ríos Solidarios. And so the portraits are one element of Jan's work. But another element is one that you can all get involved with, very much in the spirit that Mayuri is talking about, in terms of we are all guardians of the Atrato. And that is to think about a river or a body of water that means something to you in your life, whether that be where you live now or whether that be where you grew up. And maybe think about kind of an image, a message, a piece of verse, a piece of poetry. We have had one song so far from a colleague in criminology, from the River Kelvin to the River Atrato, and take a photograph and write a reflection, if you will, and share it with us as a message of solidarity from us in Glasgow or from wherever we may be in the world to the River Atrato. And we'll put on a kind of a slideshow while we're having a drink, just to see how you can get involved, and with some images that have been already uploaded to our blog site. So please do, this is the unveiling, or what's the opening night of this exhibition. It's an exhibition still in construction, and we're delighted to have Jan with us. So if you have any questions, please direct them towards Jan. But these are portraits of 8 of the 14 river guardians, to kind of, again, symbolize solidarity from Glasgow, or love from Glasgow, to the communities of the Atrato. So I would just like to thank all of our participants. Muchísimas gracias. It's been a long journey to get here. It's been a long few days. I know you're exhausted. I can imagine you're very thirsty. So please do, everybody, join us in having a glass of wine or a soft drink. And I would also like to extend our thanks to all of you for coming out on a dark November evening in Glasgow. I know everybody just wants to cuddle up under a blanket at this time of the year. So thank you all, and I hope you can participate in the Ríos Solidarios and the Rivers in Solidarity project. But I also hope that before you leave tonight, you can record yourself saying, soy Atrato, somos Atrato, etc., etc., etc. And I hope you can just join me with one final round of applause for our panel. And can I also thank our technical team, Mick and Neil over there, who have recorded this. And thank you.